With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Ellyn Ogden, who is the Worldwide Polio Coordinator for the U.S. Agency for International Development, and she will give us an update on where we are with polio. Ellyn.
Thank you very much and good morning. I always like to start with this slide because it shows kids that are paralyzed. You're going to see a lot of dots on a map, and we talk a lot about cases, but I want everybody to remember that every dot is a paralyzed child. And in polio for type 1, you get one paralytic case for every 200 silent infections. So we're trying not only to go to zero, but we're actually trying to stop replication and transmission and create the herd immunity needed to actually eradicate the disease. There is no cure for polio. The only way to deal with it is through prevention and vaccination. Just a little bit of background. Obviously, it's a paralytic disease. It's caused by a virus. It's been eradicated in many countries, beginning in the Americas since the 1990s, and from most industrialized countries. 4 of the 6 WHO regions have been certified polio-free and have gone more than 3 years without a case. It is still endemic in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. The criteria, as was discussed earlier, is a minimum of 3 years after the last case. That's supposed to give us enough opportunity to find polio if it was circulating. However, we've never been in the end game of polio eradication before. We have new vaccine combinations. We're using monovalent vaccines, had been using trivalent, now bivalent. Now we're introducing IPV and fractionalized doses of IPV. So it's very unpredictable what's going to happen to the virus in this end stage. So I always encourage people to keep an open mind, and if we need more than 3 years, the virus will let us know. And then, of course, containment. We need to also destroy any potentially infectious materials that are hiding away in laboratories and industrial sites and research facilities around the world. Again, there is no cure for polio, only prevention through vaccination. Do you know how many kids we vaccinate every year in the developing world with polio? Any ideas? Close to 700 million children. Multiple times. The vaccine that would work in the U.S., 3 doses, is not sufficient in countries where you have high degrees of malnutrition, other enterovirus rates, and other diseases that affect the immune system. So sometimes kids get up to 20 or 30 doses before you create both individual and herd immunity sufficient to stop transmission. Just a little background. As we said, polio is a virus. There's 3 types very cleverly named, 1, 2, and 3. It's very contagious. It's seasonal. It occurs worldwide. And I said there's a symptomatic to asymptomatic ratio that we have to be very conscious of. It is fecal-oral transmission. So ordinary hygiene of kids in the developing world is not very good. So you can imagine how easy it is to circulate the virus. And I would remind people that in the U.S., even with good water and sanitation in the 1950s, we still had 50,000 cases of polio a year. So water and sanitation improvements are important, but they are not the solution or the magic bullet to polio eradication. Why can it be eradicated? Well, it infects only humans. There's no animal reservoir. It doesn't survive long in the environment. There's no long-term carrier state, and we have really good vaccines. The World Health Assembly in 1988 agreed to eradicate polio by the year 2000 at an estimated cost of $120 million. How many of you would agree that we are off track? Me for sure. Yeah, big lesson learned here. The Global Polio Eradication Initiative is spearheaded by groups, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, CDC, Rotary International, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they run a pretty tight shop in terms of spearheading partners, setting policy and standards and doing things. Donors like me at USAID are kind of in that second tier. Even though we're a technical agency, we're not a spearheading partner. That has its pluses and minuses. It gives us the ability to stand outside a little bit and look at what's happening, and also ask a lot of questions when you want us to write a check. The current deadline for eradicating polio, this is assuming that there's no polio transmission in Afghanistan and Pakistan this year in 2016, would be 2019, and already at an estimated cost of over $15 billion. So that's a pretty big jump from $120 million that they figured a long time ago. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll get into. Polio has been declared a global public health emergency, and it falls under the international health regulations. So this is what the world looked like in 1988. It was pretty much everywhere. 125 countries, all three types of virus, all over the place, circulating widely. It was pretty amazing. And that's when Rotary International heard from Albert Sabin that we could eradicate polio if we could get 2 doses of oral vaccine into kids twice a year for 3 years, we could stop transmission. So Rotary said, we'll go raise that money. And they got a coalition of people together that led to the World Health Assembly resolution, and the global effort was started. By 2016, you can see we've dropped substantially from 350,000 cases a year, about 1,000 cases a day, to today, we only have 32 cases in the whole world, and they are focused in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. The last wild type 2 case was found in 1999 in Aligarh, India, and has been certified polio-free by the Global Certification Commission. And the last wild type 3 was found in 2012. Hasn't been declared eradicated yet, but we haven't seen any wild virus. Let's go. So this is the last 12 months. So it's not the calendar year. It includes some cases from last year. But it shows you the distribution in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And those are in traditional reservoirs. And we consider this a shared reservoir. But it also follows tribal and ethnic groups. It follows insecurity and fighting. It tracks very closely with groups that have been opposed to vaccination. In northeastern Nigeria, you see cases. For many, many years, we were told that immunization quality had been good and surveillance was good. But these were areas that were under Boko Haram. And so actually nothing had been done. And the cases that popped up when we looked at the genetic sequencing had been circulating for more than 4 years without detection. So again, that should factor into our rethink about what's the right amount of years between interruption and certification. You also see a couple of purple dots on there. As we know, the oral vaccine is an attenuated vaccine. And so under certain conditions, it can revert back to virulence in low immunized populations. It sounds counterintuitive, but the way to stop vaccine-derived viruses is to vaccinate everybody. And we're working very hard to do that through guidelines of outbreak response that are very aggressive to do rapidly many millions of kids around a potential case to try to stop the virus from going back into polio-free areas. So what are our main strategies? Of course, the heart of this is routine immunization, your well baby immunization. But as we all know, in many parts of the developing world, routine immunization is not very strong. And there are many populations that are left out. Beyond the reach of health services, they're nomadic, they're tribal, they're nomadic, economic, transportation, migrants, really hard to reach every child in the developing world. So we do national immunization days, which target all children under age 5 in a country. Sometimes we do subnational rounds if needed. We let the epidemiology of the virus tell us where we have to do additional rounds. But the idea is to target every single child under age 5. And if you've ever been in a village and had to look for children under age 5, it's really hard. Sometimes people hide them away. Sometimes they're in the field. Sometimes they're at school. Sometimes they're visiting someone. Often the teams don't go. A lot of our effort in having higher quality immunization days is figuring all that out. So increasingly, we're doing pre-campaign monitoring, intra-campaign monitoring, and post-campaign monitoring to allow us to understand exactly the reasons why children are missed and try to take corrective action in real time. Surveillance is a huge part of this. There's a network of 145 accredited laboratories that look at poliovirus around the world. A couple of them also do genetic sequencing. This process of accreditation is really important. It means you can trust the data coming out of the laboratories, whether it's here in Atlanta or in Islamabad. You have confidence that what they're telling you is correct. So we have intratypic differentiation. We can tell if it's polio 1, 2, or 3, if it's not polio, if it's some other non-polio enterovirus. And this guides a lot of our decisions about what's happening with the virus. The genetic sequencing, which I'll show you in a second, lets us see how long the virus has been circulating and what its nearest relative is. So we can actually trace the travel patterns of the virus itself. The surveillance network is extensive. We have surveillance officers in every district in every country of the developing world. They work through a series of smaller organizations or quacks. We work with NGO communities, community-based surveillance, active engagement at hospitals, tertiary care facilities, anywhere, shrines, any place that might find a paralyzed kid is in the network. And they're supposed to be reporting in for rapid investigation, stool sample collection, which has to be returned back to the accredited lab in a cold chain. Not an easy task. And more recently, we've enhanced that with environmental surveillance. So some lucky guy gets to go out to the sewage and take a liter of sewage and come back and see if there's any virus in there. Doesn't tell you who pooped it out, but it'll tell you if it's circulating. And there are increasingly diagnostics that are refining this, that are being rolled out. So our ability to identify polio if it was circulating is actually quite high. And we're trying to detect all background paralysis. You know, polio is not the only thing that causes paralysis. Transverse myelitis, Guillain-Barré, just to name a few other enteroviruses. So if we're picking up all of that background, we should be able to find polio if it was circulating. And then if we do find a case in a polio-free area, as I said, there's this massive outbreak response, coordinated, usually synchronized among countries, to try to really contain the spread of anything that pops up in an unusual place. This is just to show you an example of environmental surveillance, how they test the water. And you can only do it in places where there's a sewage system. And as you know, in the developing world, that's not everywhere. But many urban areas do have a sewage system, and they figure out where the best place is to try to get that sample, and it's tested frequently. And so that's an additional source of information for verification and validation that goes hand in hand with our information from the campaigns as well as our surveillance. So we triangulate data all the time in this program, trying to figure out what's going on. I know a lot of people like genetic sequencing. There's a dendrogram. Not my area of expertise, but you can see how things are related to each other and how the nucleotide differences will tell you how long something's been circulating, if it was sort of a new thing or if it's been there for a while, and where it came from. So again, this helps guide our decisions and how big an area to go for outbreak response immunization. It tells us about corridors of travel, things like that. We also use adjunct strategies. And for many, many years, the polio program was very medically, epidemiologically driven. A lot of the people factors of polio were not taken into consideration. And it took quite a lot of pushing to get them to focus on things like communication and advocacy. Public service announcements were not sufficient. You really needed to have identified messages, mass media, interpersonal communication skills. Your print materials had to resonate with communities. A lot of places are non-literate, non-numerate, so this got refined and refined and refined. So now we're much better shape to address questions and concerns as they come up right on the doorstep, and not just rely on these sort of big overarching messages. Logistics and microplanning. Getting vaccine out to 700 million kids among all kinds of terrain is incredibly difficult. We're now planning and mapping every single community and settlement. In many places, the vaccinators have to do a micro census, so we actually know how many children under 5 there are in a community. And we've been way off with some of our assumptions lately. So trying to figure this out has helped us close the gap on those last remaining cases and countries. Getting civil society involved has been a huge challenge in this program. Again, I think it was very medical, epidemiologically driven. There was no role for civil society or in communities. That took almost 12 years into the program before it became much more standardized, to include them systematically in the planning and implementation of the program. And lastly, the engagement of traditional and religious leaders. As I said earlier, many of the places where we still have polio are in places of conflict. And the only way to negotiate access is through local leaders and traditional channels. You have to have good interlocutors who understand what's going on and who are trusted by communities. This assumption of underlying trust that started in the polio program has proven not to be there. Everybody said at first, smallpox was great. Everybody's going to line up for vaccine. Well, it's not the case. And as anti-vaxxers increase in the West, we have anti-vaccination groups in developing countries. Some of them, it's fear of a vaccine, but quite often it's political. There's something in that community they want instead of vaccination. Paint the schools, fix my roads, you promise me drinking water, give us more health facilities. So the program in some of these areas is becoming more politicized. So why is it so hard to reach every child in the developing world? Well, the same children are chronically missed. Vaccinators won't go beyond a certain comfort zone. Newborns, particularly difficult. Many countries have cultural practices of keeping the children inside for the first 40 days. So if you don't have women vaccinators who are trusted by the families, who when they knock on the door can go in and vaccinate them, we're going to miss newborns. And in a country like India, where you have 192 million kids under age 5 and a birth cohort of over 20 million kids a year, you got to stay ahead of the birth cohort. So getting newborns is really important. Plus, every dose of oral vaccine primes the immune system, so subsequent doses you get a higher immune response. So it's good epidemiologically and it's good socially to run the programs in a way that take these things into consideration. Operational challenges. Can you imagine if this is what it took to get vaccine to your kid? This is the Congo. I said, people do extraordinary things to bring vaccine up to villages. There's security challenges. As I said, this is a WHO vehicle that was hit by an IED in Kandahar. We lost 3 people, and it was very unfortunate. As you know, in parts of Pakistan, there's an active fatwa against polio workers, and more than 100 polio workers or their security have been killed because they're polio workers. It's becoming a dangerous place to be involved in some of these public health interventions. It is not the same humanitarian field as it was 15 years ago. And taking these risks into account, both in terms of financing, in terms of who you select as vaccinators, and the degree of negotiation needed, should not be underestimated. I won't go into this. It's just to show when it's focused on very heavily by cross-ministerial groups. In Pakistan, for example, we work closely with the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, Education, Women's Affairs, everybody. We've been able to reduce the children inaccessible by quite a lot, from over 600,000 to less than 2,000 in recent months. Micro-planning challenges, that detail level planning is not a skill that many people have in the developing world. Generally, you know, if it's good enough, it's okay. Well, that's just not good enough for eradication. You have to really pinpoint what the issues are. Supportive supervision, again, a skill that is not readily available. And this is often provided by the external community. So throughout the polio world, there's over 20 million people, either as vaccinators, mobilizers, supervisors, helping with district planning, as independent monitors. A lot of them provide this supportive supervision that may not be available ordinarily. Migrant workers and mobile populations. On a single polio campaign, days take place over 3 to 5 days. In India, we got 5 million children on the move at bus stations, train stations, airports, ferries. So you have to design an entire strategy around your mobile and migrant movement of population if you want to get everybody at the same time and get that herd immunity. Underserved populations such as refugees and nomads require separate strategies, and we've slowly learned to develop this. Transit vaccination, that's all part of that mobile strategy. Looking at transit hubs where you can have mobile teams vaccinating all the time as people come and go, even from insecure areas. Because quite often we can't go into an insecure area, but we can do things to get kids to come out. So we need to be prepared with these transit posts. Cross-border vaccination has proven to be really, really important. So we've established on a number of international borders daily immunization activities. So on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, we now have 17 formal points where kids get vaccinated as they crisscross the area. We vaccinate over 1.5 million kids a year. And now the Pakistan government is encouraging refugees to come out, so we're trying to set up even more transit points. This is the border between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. You can see it's a much more formal border. And you have the border with Nigeria and Niger, and you're like, these are quite different borders. And I said, that's me at the top there. I said, where's the border? And they said, the tree. I said, the tree? How do you know it's a tree? And they go, everybody knows it's a tree. So I stood there and waited for somebody to come by, and sure enough, a Fulani guy said, well, yeah, this is the border, because that's the tree. We're using technology better to track where people are going and where missed settlements are. So satellite imaging is becoming really important. And negotiating access, as I said. This is just a couple of examples. I'm not going to go through all of it. But up in the, that's the right-hand corner up there in the red shirt, that's me. I was asked to negotiate ceasefires among the 3 main rebel factions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We brokered a deal to vaccinate 6 million kids, and that's still in effect today. They don't fight on the days of the polio campaigns. This one where I'm talking to the lady, this is when Nigeria stopped vaccinating entirely in 2003. And we were trying to figure out, how do you get it restarted? And so I asked my colleague there, I said, you know, which of the wives of the emir is the most influential? And they told me it was the 3rd wife. So I said, I'd like to meet with the 3rd wife. And so that's me meeting with the 3rd wife and encouraging some strong pillow talk to get the vaccination program started again. So we got this close through international cooperation, sufficient human and financial resources, evidence-based strategies, moving beyond epidemiology to really look at diplomacy, defense, development. This need to reach every single child, not just household, not just settlements, every single kid. And at every point, we have to challenge our assumptions. We have strong political support from across the world. We have a huge array of funders. The numbers here are old, but I wanted to just give you an example of how many different organizations are chipping in for this, and that it's still going to cost us billions of dollars more. It's about $1 billion a year program now, and for every year we delay, it's going to cost another $1 billion. And so, whoops, let's see if I can go back. This should, I hope, work to show you what, there we go. Just to show you how hard it is to get vaccine to different parts of the world. And what people do and how much we appreciate our frontline workers. That's a solar panel, by the way. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor for what it takes to get the polio eradicated. So globally, polio eradication is the largest effort outside of armed conflict anywhere in the world. Has over 20 million volunteers, health workers, and people working on this, and we've averted over 13 million cases of polio. And that's me if you need any additional information. Thank you so much.
With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Ellyn Ogden, who's the worldwide